I was basically working with a few of the employees with the evaluation program with spreadsheets. When someone came in the office and said that this thing was unfolding as we know it, with September the 11th with an actual aircraft flying into a building in New York City. It was unbelievable as to what was going on. I had a television in the office. I turned it on and was just ecstatic as to what was unfolding before my eyes. What did this mean to me at that time? It was just an empty feeling. It's kind of hard to describe, but many people can sort of relate to me. It just showed a very, very dark side of mankind as to why a human being would do this to others. As we know, there were countless amount of lives that were lost during that time, but it was just a very dark time in mankind's history. That's where I was on September the 11th, 2001.
Okay, go ahead.
On September 11th, I was here at NASA Glenn Research Center, and I was over at the 8x6, and I ended up in the break room with a bunch of individuals that were watching TV, and they all looked pretty upset. I asked what was going on, and they told me that a plane had struck one of the towers. And I said, well, wasn't it an accident? And they said, no, it's not an accident. Another plane just hit the other tower. So I ended up heading back to where I work over in ERB, and I was watching things unfold on TV, and I found out my wife was trying to get a hold of me. And I thought, well, she probably wants to tell me that this has happened. That must be what she wants, but I'll call her. I called her up, and she was pretty upset, and she explained that Stevie, our nephew, was in one of the Twin Towers there taking training, and he worked for Morgan Stanley at the time. He was a new employee. And watching it unfold before I knew that we had a relative in there was a different feeling. It was really hit home, and we were both pretty upset. And it wasn't a short time later that one of the towers fell. I don't think I could ever describe the feeling that I felt seeing the tower go down, thinking that we had family in that tower. As it turns out, Stevie made it out with just a couple minutes to spare. And he came home, and we all met as a family, the whole group of us, and he said, I'm only going to talk about it one time. He explained what he saw, what he went through, and he's never really spoken of it again. That's my story from 911.
Yeah, you were more relaxed than that one too.
Go.
Right. On September 11th, 2001, I was in building 14. I was on my way up the hallway. I was to service a Kearney Trucker mill. And on my way there, there's a TV mounted up on the one column. And I could see they were showing an image of where a plane had smashed into one of the Twin Towers in New York City. And I stopped and I watched it for a moment. It seemed like about 10 minutes later, another plane came and hit the same area again. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was surreal. And I knew at this moment that this could not be just an accident. Two planes flying in the same buildings at the same time, nearly. I knew at that time that this was an act of war. What it meant to me, in addition to all the humanity that was lost that day, was that the era that I felt all my life of the security of this nation was gone. It was over. Now we're as subject to war as any other nation on earth. Just a little bit of an edge of technology. That's it. Our past security was now over.
On September 11th, 2001, I was at Randolph Air Force Base in Texas, near San Antonio, where I was the Director of Logistics for the Air Force's Training Command. Shortly after I got to the office in the morning, I was informed of the first attack and then turned on the TV in my office and watched the second attack on the Twin Towers, as well as pictures of the destruction at the Pentagon. Shortly after that, our base was directed to shut down completely, and like all bases around the world, our security forces were bent on finding people intending similar destruction and killing them before that could happen. As you know, that did not happen. My mission on that day was to make sure that the people in the 3 buildings that made up my operation were safe, and that we would begin as a team to prepare for operating in a completely different normal. Terrorism uses publicity to magnify the impacts of its atrocities, to compel compliance with its demands. And by that measure, this terrorist campaign has mostly failed. History teaches us, however, that we must be relentless about our pursuit of these people to make sure that they cannot complete their mission. People ask, are we winning? Can we win? My answer is yes and yes. America has done it before, and America will surely do it again.
Okay, we're on.
Okay, I was in a training class in the rec building on September 11th. Ask me the next question.
What were you doing?
What were you doing
I was in a training class.
in that day?
And what did it mean to you?
What did it mean to me? The training class on September 11th.
September 11.
September 11th. That was shocking because at first we just hear the news and we run out the hall and look at the TV and then actually go back to class, and then run out again at actually saw the second plane crash into the tower, and we actually go back to class again until we were told that we're supposed to go home. So it was kind of shocking, and I spent that day watching the news and all that, but looking back now, I think as a country, it's great resilience recovering from that. That's it.
Outstanding.
All right. Where was I on September 11th? I was over in the outreach group at the time because we were working on an outreach book for a K through 3rd grade booklet to teach that age group about aeronautics, and we were just proofing the book, and one of the staff members came into our office and said a plane had crashed into one of the towers, and so we got the TV on only to see the second plane flying into the tower, and then that's when I think I realized something was terribly going wrong. But what did it mean to me? At that moment, I think I felt very vulnerable. I could not believe we had airplanes flying into the buildings, and yet afterwards I had a big Girl Scout troop to take the following weekend to a big camp out. We had a lot of parents that were concerned if we were really going to do the camp out, and I said, you know what, I think we just got to take everybody out into the woods where it's quiet and kind of regroup, and it was one of the best camp outs we ever had.
Good.
Hi, September 11th, 2001, I was here at work. I remember Joe Grady coming down the hall saying, Clayton, did you see the news? An airplane crashed into the building. And I said, no, I didn't. And then next thing we knew, a second one had crashed into the building. It was a very frightening time for us. We didn't know what had happened. And then when we learned it was a terrorist attack, we were glad that our country was able to come together and respond and try to help those in need.
Thank you.
September 11th, 2001, I was in the control room of the 8x6 transonic wind tunnel, and somebody had come into the data room where I was sitting and said that a plane had crashed into one of the twin towers. My initial reaction was it's probably a Cessna or somebody learning to fly, but when I came out of the control room and they patched in the TV signal, we got a chance to see how enormous the planes were. Now, as far as what it means to me is it just gives us an idea to reflect how vulnerable we can be within our own community here in the States, and how we sometimes take for granted what we do have here in the United States.
Thank you.
On September 11, 2001, I was working in a company that I was in charge of getting all the staff out as we had the tragic events of the day. And in getting everybody out of the office, it was very difficult to realize that I may never see my family again, that the staff may never see their family again, and my only goal was to make sure that everybody was out as safe as possible and that we can get to our loved ones, because unfortunately so many people lost their lives and were not able to say their goodbyes, and I wanted to make sure that all of our staff as well as myself was able to get to our loved ones.
Okay.
I remember walking into Building 77, and it was in the morning, and everybody was standing in the lobby, and they were watching the TV, and I thought it was an all hands or something going on, and it was the news was on, and so people weren't really sure if it was an accident, but it was a terrorist attack, so that's what I remember.
Okay.
Okay. Well, like many people, I'll never forget September 11th. That day, we had our PI team. They got up at 3 in the morning to come to Glen, Building 333, for mission critical testing. Middle of that testing, we heard that the World Trade Center got hit by an airplane. Like a lot of other people, it's disbelief, then shock, and then this mission critical testing just stopped. And we all hovered around the TV, and we just couldn't believe it. And so, you know, our country was on the line, and it made the NASA mission critical not look so important that day.
Go.
See, I was returning from a fly fishing trip in Idaho on the day that 9/11 happened, and it took me 3 days to get home on a Greyhound bus, and that was very interesting, going through all the different small towns, cities, from all the way from Boise back to Cleveland, and it was quite an event and very stressful, obviously, but we made it.
Okay.
Well, on 9/11, I was in Austin, Texas, at a design review. What I remember most is the feeling of just utter shock and the need, just overpowering need to get back to my family.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, I was off-site at a training session with Center Director Julian Earls, and we got the news, and it was a hotel conference room. We went out into the lobby to watch the news on television, and of course everybody was very shocked and stunned by what happened. And I remember the instructor being concerned about how she was going to get back to Washington, D.C. Since the airports were closed, and she apparently had to rent a car. But it was quite shocking and in disbelief of what was happening at the time.
All right.
Should I just start out saying my very first experience on
okay.
9/11?
Yep, go ahead.
My memories of 9/11 was my very first time of starting my new job here at NASA, and I got to the gate and they told me that the gate was closed due to the 9/11 terrorist attacks. So I was emotionally upset due to that, as well as starting my first job. So that was my experience on 9/11/2001.
You look very comfortable there. Okay, whenever you're ready.
Hi. What I remember on 9/11 was the beautiful blue sky. And I've never seen a sky so pretty as that day. And every time I see a sky that beautiful as I did that day, I think of those emotions from 9/11. How's that?
Okay.
Go?
Go.
So my memory from September 11th is as a member of Julian Earl's senior management team, we were all off-site. We were in North Olmsted at a hotel doing a training program, and happened to go on break right after the first plane hit, and all went down to the hotel lobby to see, thinking it was an accident, to see the pictures, and saw the second one happen, and immediately realized we had to get back to the center. We all went straight for our cars, headed back. Julian led the way, got to the back gate, and the center had been shut down. We'd been in lockdown because of this. And I remember being in the car right behind Julian Earls and watching him negotiate with the guard at the gate. He later told me that the guard wasn't letting him in. He told the guard that he would have to shoot him because we're all coming in. this is a crisis, we have to be there. And we all just followed him through and got back and tried to deal with the crisis. Rumors were everywhere. I remember a big rumor that one of the planes was headed for Cleveland. I think it came from the fact that one of them had been turned around by the Cleveland control. That turned into a rumor that it was coming here, and so we worked the evacuation to get people safely out of the center as quickly as possible. Very surreal. I will never forget that experience.
Well, on September 11th, I remember it was a beautiful morning, and I was just sitting in my office in Building 86 when Elaine Kolbaka, one of our support contractors, popped her head in and said, a plane just crashed into the World Trade Center. So I remember then going into Harry Sakanic's office. It was me and Brian Smith sitting in Harry's office, just the two of us watching the events unfold on his television. And I remember when the second tower collapsed, we actually thought we were watching a replay of the first tower. It was kind of shocking that it was actually the second tower that came down. So it was obviously a very sad, surreal day, and one that's impacted our lives ever since. So it was quite a shocking event.
Okay, go.
I remember on September 11th, I was sitting in a meeting in the morning, and my wife called me to tell me that a plane had crashed into the World Trade Center. And recall the meeting, people were getting wind of it, and the meeting breaking up, and people retreating to offices, and in a lot of cases just in time to watch the second plane hit the Twin Towers, and just the feeling of utter disbelief and uncertainty as to what was going to happen next, and wondering what the country would be dragged into.
Okay, you're on.
I remember on 9/11 when the event happened that I was a contractor for Bendix in Elyria, and it was a total astonishment that such a horrible thing could have happened. And I thought they were originally talking about something that happened in another country, and I couldn't believe that it actually happened here in the United States. And the whole office gathered into the very small lunchroom, and we all turned the TV on and watched it in just utter astonishment. And the establishment that I worked for at the time allowed us to go home if we had family members who were tied to it directly. And I don't recall if I went home or not, because it's all a blur from there. So go America.
Okay.
I was on travel on September 9th, 11th, at University of Kansas in Lawrence to review a grant work at a major network facility. So in the morning, we walk in at that facility, and this professor had arranged everything in a very large conference room with almost a room-size screen. And to our shock and horror, we were witnessing the event which unfolded in New York that day. Immediately the town was closed. We spent most of the day seeing what was happening, the horror we were watching, and exchanging our point of views. And subsequent to that, our flights home were totally canceled, but we found the town very friendly to us, and they helped us to arrange a car for me to come one way all the way to Cleveland, Ohio. And I drove with all the news which was unfolding with very high emotion, what was happening at that time. And on the way, on the rest stops in smaller towns, the United States flag was everywhere. The spirits at the same time was very high, but at the same time mood was very somber. It was an amazing feeling to see how the country and its people had reacted, and I felt such a strong part of it with them. But at the same time, in Cleveland, Ohio, story was unfolding with my family. My son was at that time in 4th grade, And immediately the school made an announcement that plane was going to hit our area, and Rocky River, Ohio, where I live, is very close to the airport. And a panic ensued from there. My wife also works at Cleveland Clinic, and so she could not show up on time. He was left alone there. And his sense of fear and what impact 9/11 had on us will still remain in our mind for a long time, because my son reacted as if the plane were coming to Cleveland, Ohio, and could not understand that they were just in New York, and like whole United States was impacted, and I think even adults reacted in some way that way. But he could not rationalize the events, and subsequently he lost a major part of his hair. Fortunately, his hair did come back, but our family saw what a 9/11-like event can do to a young boy, and our resolve that such events should not take place again stays with us all the time.
I wanted to tell you a little bit. On 9/11, we were getting ready for our first, or to start a flight week on the KC-135 reduced gravity aircraft. It was a beautiful day, and we were wanting to get going because it was just so pretty. Took off normally and headed out to our flight area. All the operators started to prepare their equipment, and all of a sudden John Yannick, who was the flight director, came back and said that air traffic control had ordered us back to Cleveland. And of course everybody was wondering what was going on, and so we shut everything down and sit back down in the rear of the aircraft. And we didn't have cell phones or anything to communicate. The pilots had some cell phones, and their only way to communicate was to call back to Ellington Field to talk to them about what was going on or tell them what we were doing. And that's when they said that an aircraft had flown into the World Trade Center. And everybody's like, well, is this an accident, on purpose, all the usual questions. And so then we started to get a little bit dribbles of more information, and found out that it was 2 aircraft, in fact, and headed back. We did land, and as we found out later, that we landed right before the Delta flight that was diverted here from Boston. So, meaning if we would have come in after them, we probably would have ended up someplace else, because they closed Hopkins immediately afterwards. We taxied over to the tarmac over by the IX Center, and sat there for, I forget exactly how long, but they shut down the engines and opened all the doors because it was just getting too hot inside. And eventually a bus came from Glen here and brought us back into the center, for which case we could leave. But as we were sitting over there and discussing the events that were going on, I forget exactly who said it, but it's turned out to be a very prophetic type of statement. He just said, we landed in a world that was much different from the world we took off from. And didn't really realize that at the time, but every day I'm reminded that how true that statement is, and how much of our lives have been touched by the events and the tragedy of 9/11.